Chapter 3 Out of the Arctic. With the excitement of having the great Admiral Drake speak to him over the radio, and his curiosity about the Admiral's message to him, Mr. Popper did not sleep very well that night. He did not see how he could possibly wait to find out what the Admiral meant. When morning came, he was almost sorry that he had nowhere to go, no houses to paint, no rooms to paper. It would have helped pass the time. "Would you like the living room papered over?" he asked Mrs. Popper. "I have quite a lot of paper number 88 left over from the mayor's house." "I would not," said Miss Popper firmly. "The paper on it now is plenty good. I am going to the first meeting of the Ladies' Aid and Missionary Society today. I don't want any mess around to clean up when I get home." "Very well, my love," said Mr. Popper meekly, and he set down his pipe, his globe, and his book, The Arctic Adventures. But somehow, as he read today, he could not keep in mind on the printed words. His thoughts kept straying away to the Admiral Drake. What had he meant by a surprise for Mr. Popper? Fortunately for his peace of mind, he did not have to wait very long. That afternoon, while Mrs. Popper was still away at her meeting, Janie and Bill had not yet come home from school, there was a loud ringing at the front door. "I suppose it is the postman. I won't bother to answer it," he said to himself. The bell rang again, a little louder this time. Grumbling to himself, Mr. Popper went to the door. It was not the postman who stood there. It was an expressman with the largest box Mr. Popper had ever seen. "Party by the name of Popper live here?" "That's me." "Well, here's a package that's come from Air Express all the way from Antarctica. Some journey, I'll say." Mr. Popper signed the receipt and examined the box. It was covered all over with markings. "Unpack it at once," said one. "Keep cool," said another. He noticed the box was punched here, and there were little air holes. He could imagine that once he had the box inside the house, Mr. Popper lost no time getting out the screwdriver. For by this time, of course, he had already guessed what it was that the surprise from Admiral Drake was. He had succeeded in removing the outer boards and part of the packing, which was a layer of dry ice, when from the depths of the packaged case he suddenly heard a faint "ork." His heart stood still. Surely he had heard that sound before in the Drake expedition movies. His hands were trembling so hard that he could scarcely lift off the last of the wrappings. It was not the slightest doubt about it. It was a penguin. Mr. Popper was speechless in delight. The penguin was not speechless. "Ork!" it said again. This time it held out its flippers and jumped over the packing debris. It was a stout little fellow, about 2.5 feet high. Although it was the size of about a small child, it looked very much like a gentleman, with its smooth white waistcoat in front and its long black tailcoat dragging a little behind. And his eyes were set in two white circles from its black head. It turned the head from one side to the other, at first with one eye, and then the other. It examined Mr. Popper. Mr. Popper had read that penguins are extremely curious, and he soon found out that it was true, for stepping out, the visitor began to inspect the house. Down the hall, it went into the bedrooms with its strange, promptious little strut. When it, or he, Mr. Popper had already begun to think of him as a he, got to the bathroom, it looked around with a pleased expression on its face. Perhaps, thought Mr. Popper, all that while tilling remains of him behind ice and snow at the South Pole. Poor thing, maybe he's thirsty. Carefully, Mr. Popper began to fill the bathtub with cold water. It was a little difficult because the exquisite bird kept reaching over and trying to bite the faucet with his sharp red beak. Finally, however, he succeeded at getting the tub all filled. Since the penguin kept looking it over, Mr. Popper picked it up and dropped it in. The penguin seemed not to mind. "Anyway, you're not shy," said Mr. Popper. "I guess you're sort of used to being playing around with all those explorers at the poles." When he thought the penguin had had enough of the bath, he drew out the stopper. He was just wondering what to do next when Ginny and Jane burst in from school. "Papa," they shouted together at the bathroom door, "what is it?" "It's a penguin from the South Pole sent to me by Admiral Drake." "Look," said Bill, "it's marching." The delighted penguin was indeed marching. With its little pleasing nods of its handsome black head, he was parading up and down the side of the bathtub. Sometimes he seemed to counting the steps it took. 6 steps for the length, 2 steps for the width, 6 steps for the length again, and 2 more for the width. "Such a big bird, he takes an awful small steps," said Bill. "And look how his little black coat drags behind. It looks almost like as if it were too big for him," said Janie. but the penguin was tired of marching. This time, when he got to the end of the tub, he decided to jump in the slippery curve. When it turned with its outstretched flippers to bang down on its white stomach, they could see those flippers. They were black on the outside like the sleeves of a tailcoat, and were white underneath. "Gook, gook," said the penguin, trying its new game again and again. "What's his name, papa?" asked Ginny. "Gook, gook," the penguin said, sliding down once more on its gauzy stomach. "It sounds something like Cook, Mr. Pepper." "Why, of course it is. We'll call him Cook, Captain Cook."